When I was 13, the dawning of a new millennium took place on New Year's Eve. While people were fearing the worst with the Y2K bug or out partying and drinking, I was home alone. In 1996, my parents had split up, and from there they divorced, and my mother and I moved across the country from Oregon to Tennessee with her best friend. On the eve of the year 2000, I was home alone, and my mother was currently out of state. Now, this didn't worry me, as this was not the first time. I often came home to find a note on the kitchen counter saying they had gone to Florida for a few days and that there were groceries in the fridge. Since the divorce, she was regularly leaving me alone for long periods of time to go to Florida. We lived on a relatively quiet road surrounded by trees and set a few miles out of town, and I knew most of the people, if not by name, then by face enough to wave and small chat with, and had never before been given a reason to be afraid of being alone. On the night in question, I was staying up late watching television. I remember I was watching the movie His Bodyguard on USA Channel, and had most of the lights on in the house. Not because I was afraid, but because at 13, I wasn't concerned with electricity bills or saving the environment. I felt completely safe and protected within my little bubble of home. As I was watching the movie, I kept hearing these weird sounds outside, but I remember thinking it was probably the neighbors. Though they weren't extremely close, a couple of them were having a party, people over for the holiday. About halfway into the movie, however, the power in the house suddenly went dead. I sat on the couch for a minute, just sort of in a panic daze, because it was near midnight and pitch black. I remember thinking the power must have gone out and that it would come back on, so I just decided to sit on the couch with my blanket and wait. A few minutes passed by when I heard a noise in the kitchen, where the back door is. My heart started racing in my chest, because I thought it sounded like the back door being shut. The back door sits just off the dining room, which is connected to the kitchen, which leads directly into the living room, where I was currently sitting on the couch. A few seconds passed after I had heard the sound, and I was straining my ears to pick up anything that wasn't supposed to be there. Every noise suddenly felt magnified. When footsteps sounded on the floor, I immediately slithered off the couch onto all fours, crawled around the ottoman, and started as slowly and as quietly as I could make my way toward the space between the love seat and the couch. I knew I could fit under the side table and be completely hidden by the dark and the ottoman, from playing hide-and-go-seek in the dark many times with my friends during sleepovers. I was nearly there when the footsteps became more apparent. I knew from the sound of them that whoever it was making their way through the kitchen now toward the living room. They weren't hurried or anything. It was like they were just moving around in the kitchen. I glanced up from where I was crouched on the floor, and to my horror there was a dark silhouette standing in the archway between the two rooms. To my credit, I didn't scream. However, I did panic. I stood immediately to my feet from my hiding spot and ran down the hallway. And I believe the only reason I wasn't overcome was because the person chasing me had to get around the ottoman in the dark to follow me. I did what all children do when they're afraid, and I bypassed the front door, the guest bedroom, the bathroom, and ran to the farthest door down the hallway. My room. In all honesty, I probably wouldn't have been able to get the front door unlocked and open in time, as it was right off the side of the couch. When I was 10, I got a bird for my birthday. He was a blue-fronted Amazon, and I named him Boo, because it was October and close to Halloween. Boo had a large iron cage. It could have been metal, but very large, sturdy, and like 6 feet tall, and it was kept in my room, despite the fact that Boo, like me, pretty much had the run of the house whenever you wanted. This information will become relevant later in the story. As I ran into the room, I slammed the door shut and locked it. However, the lock was simply one of those little turn knobs that you can easily pop with a butter knife. I had barely gotten the door shut and locked when the person on the other side knocked on it. I have no idea why they knocked, if they did it to mock me or to scare me, but I knew in my heart that my little lock was not going to keep whoever it was on the other side out of my room. It didn't keep my mother out when we were arguing, and it wouldn't stand up to brute force. I was panicking, on the verge of tears when the person started laughing. It was low, quiet, and because of that it was even more frightening. It wasn't like manic laughter, but as if they were genuinely amused. It was the laughter that really frightened me, and I started heavily, hysterically crying and looking around my room to figure out what I could do. That was when I realized Boo's cage would fit almost perfectly between the door and the wall of my closet. The cage moved quietly on my carpeted floor, but as I pushed it into place, it scraped against the door and alerted whoever it was on the other side that I was trying to barricade myself in, because suddenly they threw themselves at my door, and you could hear the sound of the wood splintering and the door handle being twisted violently. Boo, who had been stirred by the movement awake, began literally screaming and flapping his wings. I might have screamed with him, but honestly, I don't remember screaming. I just remember being extremely scared. Terrified, I crawled under my bed. Couch, a bunk bed with a futon on the bottom, metal, and waited. Several minutes passed and the person eventually stopped attacking my door. Boo continued screaming even after he had stopped. Though being under my bed gave me no feelings of being secure, I didn't come out from under it because I simply had nowhere else to go. I thought about trying to go out the window, but I was afraid he might expect it and therefore be waiting for me on the other side. And it was also several feet off the ground, as the house was built on a raised foundation. I remember laying under my bed, terrified, for what felt like hours. I must have fallen asleep because I awoke the next morning to daylight. The fear of what happened came back to me as soon as I registered where I was and why, and scared that whoever had been in my house might still be there. I decided to crawl out the window and run to a neighbor since it was daylight outside, and therefore I felt less afraid. Crawling out a window is a lot harder than it looks, and I did it less than gracefully, as I was not, and still am not, the most coordinated human being. Once I was back on my feet, however, I carefully made my way around the house, and that's when I noticed that the back door was wide open. Scared, but feeling braver now that I was outside and that it was morning instead of a pitch-black night, I walked up the back steps and peered inside. Seeing nothing out of the ordinary, no terrifying man leering at me, basically, I decided to go inside. Looking back, I cringe on how stupid this could have turned out, and that I wish I could have told my younger self to make this smarter move and just go get help. But thankfully, no one was inside the house. I did a terrifying, heart-pounding room-to-room check, looking in closets and under beds, behind the couch, anywhere I thought even a small child might be able to fit. I even popped the lock on my mom's bedroom so I could check it, and then re-locked it afterwards. When I was positive there was no one there, I went back to lock the back door. I had left it open in case I needed to escape, and noticed that the breaker box on the opposite wall was open. The main switch had been pulled. I flipped it back on, locked both locks on the back door, checked all the windows and front door, and then called my mom, where I once again broke down crying hysterically. She called a coworker, who came and stayed the entire day with me as they drove back. My mom still took random trips to Florida after that, but I always went with her from then on forward. So terrifying, laughing crazy person that broke into my house on New Year's Eve. Please let's never meet again. I sincerely hope no other young girl had to meet you either. I don't know if you were just some drunk visitors of a neighbor, but you terrorized me that night. I was afraid of being alone when my mom was working, and to this day, I still get scared when I am home alone, overthink what I would do if someone came inside, and where I would hide. When my cats make noise out of nowhere, I immediately investigate for fear it's someone trying to get in. My mom had to help lift me back into my bedroom window so I could move Boo's cage out of the corner between my bedroom door and closet. We never had another incident at the house, and we moved in town to an apartment a year later. It was 10:05 a.m. on Wednesday, November 10th, 1999, less than 2 months away from the impending year 2000 problem, more commonly referred to as Y2K, when the president stopped at the South Grounds to speak to the press on his way to York, Pennsylvania. We are releasing our fourth and final quarterly report on public and private efforts to address the Y2K computer problem. The report shows that our hard work in this country is paying off. And while there is more to do, I expect we will experience no major national breakdowns as a result of the year 2000 date change. At the time, it seemed a little too good to be true, a little too convenient, that the apocalypse we had been warned about for years was suddenly of no concern. Which is why, less than 2 months later, on Friday, December 31st, 1999, the eve of destruction, I threw an Armageddon party. But little did I know at the time how ironic the party's theme really was, given what would happen to us that night. Little did I know that something much more terrifying than Y2K was in store for us. It's simple, Dennis said to me, as I stood there in the kitchen, talking with him and Brad. You just ask her, Suzanne, want to be my New Year's kiss? No, you idiot, Brad replied. At midnight, you just go for it. Chicks dig when you take initiative. I dunno, guys, I said, not quite buying either suggestion. Wait, I got it. Come with me, Brad demanded, with a cheeky smile, as he grabbed me by the collar, leading myself and Dennis out of the kitchen and into the living room. No, whatever it is, please don't, I mumbled, but it was too late. Ladies and gentlemen, Brad called out to the group of friends who were gathered around the coffee table, laughing and drinking. It was a mix of 4 guys and 7 girls, not counting Brad, Dennis, and myself. 14 in total. Brad looked down at his watch. With under an hour left before the end of days, I have a proposition. The group of friends fell silent, awaiting his announcement, until 7 minutes in heaven, Brad screamed at the top of his lungs. Suddenly, everyone burst out laughing, half of the group cheering on the idea and half panning it. What? I'm serious. Who's going to go first? Brad asked as he scanned the room. Let's see. How about? Let me guess. He's going to pick me, I thought to myself. Mikey, shocker. I put my hand over my face in embarrassment as Brad pointed at me. Hey, chill out, man. Dennis yelled to Brad, but he ignored him. And why not? Brad said, continuing to look around. Let me guess. Suzanne. Suzanne? Asshole. Suzanne immediately turned bright red as she, too, covered her face, smiling. Dude, I began to whisper to Brad, but he immediately pushed me away. Well, what say you, Suzanne? Totally up to you. No pressure. The group turned to Suzanne. Sure. Why not? And then back to me. I replied, but before I could continue, Brad opened a nearby closet door and shoved me in. Thank me later, he said with a wink. You're an asshole, I replied with a dirty look. And like that, Suzanne walked over, stepped into the closet with me, and shut the door behind her. That's when things got weird. And not like a good weird, like a very, very bad weird. You see, a few minutes later, while Suzanne and I were making awkward small talk in the closet, discussing how long we should let everyone think that we're making out. Because, let's be honest, I didn't have the courage to initiate making out. We heard a commotion. At first, I think I heard something like a knock at the front door of the apartment, a conversation, and raised voices, each drowned out by the TV speakers, which were blasting a telecast of the New Year's Eve countdown, live from NYC. We didn't think much of it. What was that? Suzanne asked me. I don't know. Maybe someone called the cops on us for being too loud? I offered up. It was a shot in the dark, pun intended. You want to step out? Nah, they'll figure it out. I was relieved that she declined the offer and chose to stay in there with me. Maybe I have a shot, after all. I wondered, but then the commotion grew louder as it moved into the living room, directly outside the closet door. Open the door a little, Suzanne whispered, clearly a little concerned. I did as she asked, and quietly cracked the closet door just a little, just enough so that we could see a sliver of what was going on in the living room. That's when I first saw them. A group of hooded intruders, all wearing the same long robes and holding what looked like the same crescent blades, shoving my friends to the ground. Get on the floor, one of them screamed. Tie them up. Another ordered, as the rest of the hooded men rounded up my friends and gathered them into a circle at the center of the room. Please, don't hurt us, I heard a friend cry out. Let me go, another yelled. Meanwhile, inside the closet, where luckily no one knew or remembered that we were in, Suzanne and I said nothing. We just stood there quietly in the closet, listening on in horror. I pulled out my cell phone, lowered its volume, called the police, and simply whispered my address and help. The living room then grew silent, aside from what sounded like a few muffled screams, until we heard one of the intruders' yells. The time has come! Then, through the slit in the open closet door, I saw 2 of the introducers grab 2 of my friends and draw their blades, followed by the sound of 2 slashing noises, the 2 thuds, and my friends screaming. I squinted through the opening of the door to see what had happened, and spotted 2 friends lying on the floor, blood pouring out of them and seeping into the carpet. You have both fulfilled your duty and your service to this life. May the end of the millennium, and the world as we know it, bring you safely into the next. I then saw the very same 2 intruders, who had just killed my friends, raise the very same blades that they had executed them with, and execute themselves, toppling to the floor beside them. It's a fucking 2K death cult, I thought to myself. I would later learn that I was right. The same ritualistic sacrifice went on a few more times, performed by 2 members of the cult at a time, on 2 friends at a time, as Suzanne and I clung to each other in the dark, our hands covering each other's mouths. Through the crack, I eventually saw the last of my friends, Dennis and Brad, fall to the floor. At that point, only 2 intruders remained, with no one left to sacrifice. 2 are missing, one said to the other. Find them, the other replied. We must join the others in the afterlife. Assuming that they were referring to Suzanne and I, and anticipating that they would find us any minute now, I quietly reached down in the dark closet, searching for an object to defend myself with, but found nothing. Fuck. It was then that I devised a plan, wherein, should the intruders open the closet door, I would leap at them with all my might, tackle them to the ground, and attempt to take their weapons. And so, that is exactly what I did. Well, at least, partially. Sure enough, after a couple minutes, over the sound of the New Year's Eve broadcast playing on the TV, I heard them begin rummaging through the apartment. As they got closer, and closer, and closer, until finally, I heard the living room floors creak, as someone crept over to the closet, and slowly turned the doorknob. The next thing I knew, I was lying face down in the living room, collapsed on top of one of the intruders, who I now saw had been impaled by his own crescent blade. How the fuck did I pull that off? Hearing Suzanne scream, and remembering that there had been 2 cult members left, I hopped up to my feet and whipped around, only to find the last of their ranks grappling with Suzanne, as he attempted to pull her out of the closet. His back to me, I seized the opportunity, and, pulling the weapon out of the dead intruder that I had just tackled, charged at the cult member, and pierced it through his torso. He fell back, arms flailing, as if trying to swat away whoever had just impaled him, but by the time he fell to the floor, he, too, was dead. Suzanne and I locked eyes, and just stood there in silence, wide-eyed and shaking. The only sound in the room, that of the New Year's Eve countdown, still blaring from the TV. And then, we heard, point 5, point 4, point 3, point 2, point 1. Happy New Year! Suzanne and I both looked over at the TV, then back at each other, before simultaneously leaning in for a passionate kiss, as Auld Lang Syne rang out across the room. A room filled to the brim with the bodies of cult members and friends alike, one dead intruder for every friend sacrificed. I pulled away from the kiss for a moment. The cops will be here any minute, I said, looking down at the carnage all around us. Just one more minute, Suzanne replied. She pulled me back in. I must have blacked out after that, but the police would later tell me that when they arrived, they found us still standing there in the center of the room, still shaking, and still locked in a loving embrace, the New Year's Eve after show still playing on the TV. And so, on Saturday, January 1st, 2000, the entire world let out a huge sigh of relief, as the feared Y2K disaster failed to materialize, instead welcoming in the dawn of the new millennium. In the 24 years that followed, many have looked back on the scare as a flop, debating whether the anticlimactic outcome was inevitable, a speculation blown out of proportion, or that the efforts of those who heeded the warnings prevented what would have become an actual catastrophe. We may never know, but for Suzanne and I, we look back on it as something else.